find a respite to speak a truth that often offends powerful structures. Former Baylor University presidents Herbert Reynolds, Robert Sloan, John Lilly, and Bill Underwood were protective of me against tides of criticism which powerful others swept to my feet through the years. About that, I have remained relatively silent, but very grateful. Those university presidents made a not insignificant contribution to my family's well-being. Thus I wondered when Kenneth Starr became president if the protection would change. Still, I encourage those who grumbled prejudgments against President Starr to give him the benefit of the doubt. Since then, by many accounts, he has served the university in a way that has reassured many. This is important in a place where some of you have questioned hiring practices against gays, lesbians, Muslims, Hindus, and others practiced by Baylor University. Although some may focus on such limitations, until June 29th of this year, I candidly found it generally otherwise. June 29th was the day I learned of a secret university investigation against me, begun in March of this year, for alleged offenses reportedly routine at Baylor, but which are selectively enforced, with a resultant chill on academic freedom. 2 days later, on July 1st, I was informed that President Starr had approved charges against me. After that, my job duties as longtime director of the Center for Jewish Studies began to be systematically eroded, most recently leading to Baylor's cancellation of the invitation to Cornell West. In fact, in mid-July, my fall classes were unilaterally canceled. Then, on the eve of this honor, Saturday, November 29th to be exact, I learned that charges which I have yet to see were filed with the Baylor Faculty Dismissal Committee on November 16th. Whether the AAR timing was set to embarrass me, I cannot say. What I can say is that it would be dishonest of me to accept this honor as a Baylor professor without saying something to not mislead you. At a minimum, I must acknowledge the awkwardness of this moment in the midst of so many pleasant ones spent with so many of you, for whom I have such high regard. I do not wish to embroil you in what I see as essentially a battle over my academic freedom. So I must, while acknowledging gratitude to Baylor for the past 13 years, also acknowledge the painful struggle which continues, with what is becoming the future Baylor. I would not want later for any of you as friends and colleagues to ask, Mark, why didn't you tell us, rather than remain silent? I speak briefly now, given what I currently understand of the rules of the Baylor process. I will for now honor the process by not discussing the specifics, except to say that I believe that this is a pretext to silence an independent voice at the place for which I have had deep appreciation. And I would be remiss in not expressing appreciation for the willingness of Cornell West and Rosemary Radford Ruther to co-chair a committee in support of my academic freedom at Baylor University. But please realize, my critique applies to the liberal and liberationist academy as well, which is not one whit better when it comes to the real Jewish prophetic in our time. I distinguish the real Jewish prophetic from the expropriated and watered-down Jewish prophetic that abounds in biblical studies, Levinasian ethics, and textual reasoning circles The prophetic there is used for other purposes, to soften, even diminish the prophetic. To illustrate the persistence of the real prophetic, I begin with a journey a few years ago when I was asked to give a keynote address at a conference in Israel. Here's what happened. I had invited a 3 Women in Jerusalem panel, a Palestinian Muslim, a Palestinian Christian, and a Jewish Israeli, to come to my Center for Jewish Studies. Just a week before, I spoke at an event that they were attending in Indiana, the same tour. I was nervous about meeting the Jewish Israeli representative, Ronnie Hammerstein. Her picture showed an intense person, no smile for the camera. In my early dissenting years, Israeli Jews looked down on diaspora Jews, even when they had left Israel for the security of the United States. How could Jews safely living in America speak critically about Israel? I arrived at the event. Ronnie came bounding toward me. I thought, here goes. But instead, she reached out her hand and said, I have been looking forward to meeting you. I have been reading you for years. Please help us. Please help us. At that moment, I knew everything had changed. Jewish history had come full circle. We were at the end. We were also at the beginning. Ronnie invited me to Israel for a keynote lecture. I decided to take my son, Aaron, along. Aaron had already been to Israel-Palestine to rebuild Palestinian homes destroyed by Israel. Aaron and I go back a long way together. It is more than coincidence that I wrote my book, Toward a Jewish Theology of Liberation, in 1985-86, the year that Aaron was conceived and came to life. Then I wrote about a Constantinian future I saw on the horizon. I didn't want to bequeath that future to Aaron, but it was already too late. I failed, obviously. Indeed, we live in the golden age of Constantinian Judaism. Yet even in the golden age of Constantinian Judaism, the Jewish prophetic lives. Though you wouldn't know it in the American Academy of Religion, in its Jewish study sections, or in the Society of Jewish Ethics, would you? A scandalous silence turns its back on the central question facing the Jewish people. What we as Jews have done, what we as Jews are doing to the Palestinian people is wrong. Since the rabbis and Jewish studies folks won't speak this confession, perhaps we can chant it if we have a cantor in the room. So ask your Jewish colleagues to make this confession in the same way you ask colleagues if they're against racism or sexism. These are legitimate academic creedal confessions. Why not add this one? And if you don't, ask yourself why you won't. I believe that there is only one reason to be Jewish, to practice conscience, which is the deep embrace of the prophetic being the indigenous of the people Israel. Our great gift to the world. Biased. The greatest gift to the world, the prophetic. To perform the prophetic in our time is the reason to be Jewish. There are Constantinian Jews and their counterparts, progressive Jews, whom I consider to be the left wing of Constantinian Judaism. And here I include Michael Lerner and Arthur Waskow and Judith Plaskow, the left wing of Constantinian Judaism. But there are also Jews who embody the prophetic, Jews of conscience. But note this, a Jew of conscience isn't one who is progressive on every issue except Israel-Palestine. Those other issues are Jewish no-brainers. The test is Palestine. In Israel-Palestine, Aaron and I passed through these awful fascist terminals that regulate Palestinian entry into and out of Israel proper, from Jerusalem and to Bethlehem, from Jerusalem to Ramallah and back. Think of these terminals in relation to Jewish history. Aaron and I looked up at the apartheid wall from the Israeli and Palestinian sides, this ghetto wall. Think of this wall in relation to Jewish history. I ask if Jewish history has come to this, but the question is rhetorical. It has. We have arrived. Which brings me to the question of questions that haunts my later writing. Should we be grateful for the prophetic which brings an unremitting exile? Think Ezekiel, commanded to eat the text God has prepared. The text which is also Ezekiel's doom. Ezekiel eats the text and is surprised. The text tastes sweet, just like honey. So Aaron and I arrive at a conference where I was giving the keynote address in the south of Israel on the Gaza border. I speak, and my Israeli respondent, whose name is unknown to me, pronounces on my lecture his critique that I am mealy-mouthed, too much on the one hand and on the other, not critical of Israel enough, so forth and so on. I enjoyed his critique tremendously and smiled throughout, which enrages him. Afterwards, he confronts me. How can I smile as he batters me pillar to post? I tell him that I love being criticized from the left, that it is a great joy, and that I could listen to him forever.